Hi, and welcome back to my channel. I hope that you're all doing good. Guys, this is the last video of January and I still can't believe it. I have a surprise for you all since Valentine's Day is coming up. I've decided to dedicate the February to crimes that were committed by couples, and on top of that I'll be posting one additional video on the 14th, so definitely stay tuned for that. Today's case is a case that I haven't really heard that much about whilst doing my research, and it's the story about Franz Fuchs, who lived in Austria, and how he terrorized pretty much an entire nation for years. The trigger warnings for today's case are xenophobia, foreign hate, letter bombs, right-wing fashionism, terrorism, and murder, threat, as well as suicide. So without any further ado, let's get on to the video. So today's case takes us to Austria. On December 12th in 1949, Franz Fuchs was born in Gralla, which is located in southern Styria. I couldn't find out much about his family, but I do know that he had a brother and that his father was a trained barrel maker and also a SPU local council member. The family was also more situated in the lower middle class, and Franz growing up didn't really have much friends. He was more on the introverted side. He was a very smart kid, but because of his speech errors and accent, he was bullied by his former peers. Interests were in natural science, playing the piano, which he taught himself how to play it. After he finished school, he went to study physics at a college in Graz, and it's also said that at the time he got into his first serious relationship. But Franz didn't really take school all that serious. In 1969, he got himself a summer job. His plan was to make enough money to be able to buy a train ticket, which would take him to Germany because he was able to get himself a better job there. He was working on an assembly line, but despite the fact he was still kind of all by himself there. Franz didn't really get involved in outside activities in college. He was more interested in technical stuff and he liked to do handicraft. It is said that his room was full of electronic pieces, measuring devices, components, and all that kind of stuff. Franz even took the time on his breaks to try and teach his foreign colleagues the German language. Franz was also supposed to get some money from his brother, kind of as a gift, but he instead asked his brother to rather donate it to the victims of Yugoslavia. In 1976, Franz quit his job because he was denied a promotion as a technical draftsman for a second time. In fact, he returned to Austria for a brief time in 1971, where he tried to get into college again, but was denied once more. And on top of it all, his girlfriend also broke up with him. Franz was so devastated that he gave away and sold all of his electronic devices in hopes to be able to leave this part of his life behind him. So after quitting his job, Franz moved back to Austria and back to his parents' home. He tried his hardest to find another job, but unfortunately he just had no luck. His mental state got so bad over time that he started to think about taking his own life, and he did attempt to commit suicide. He planned to shoot himself at the mountain lake, and on the 8th of August in 1976, he wrote a 4-paged farewell letter to his parents, but his mother thankfully found the letters in time and told her husband about it. His father called the doctor, and on the 9th of August, Franz was admitted into a mental hospital. During his entire stay there, Franz just kept blaming his father for it. It is later said that Franz in general was a very resentful person. All the failures he experienced throughout his lifetime just kept on haunting him. It's kind of like he just couldn't let go of the past. After his release, Franz did try to find another job, but once again he was just unsuccessful. Franz even called his former work in Germany, but they didn't have any need for him at the time. Because of the circumstances, Franz and his parents decided to expand their home and build an extension to the parental home where Franz would move in. He moved in the extensions and even decided to bury the pistol that he tried to take his own life with. And after a while, Franz even managed to get himself another job. He worked at a company which monitored the groundwaters of power plants, where he even managed to become one of the more important workers there. But unfortunately, tragedy will strike once again for Franz, because his boss took his own life by inhaling exhaust fumes, and after the CEO died, the company closed in 1984, leaving Franz without a job yet again. In 1986, a former schoolmate of Franz was actually able to get him a job, but unfortunately Franz just couldn't get along with his boss, and in 1988 Franz was actually fired yet again. He stated that it was indeed him who called it quits, but either way, he was unemployed yet again and wouldn't be able to find himself another job. Franz also refused to take unemployment benefits. He had everything under control financially to the point where he could just live off with his savings. And that's also the time where his personality just started to drift drastically. And his racial tendencies started to show more and more over the time. On the 27th of July in 1993, the Federal was giving an interview where he was asked about the foreigner growth, and he just stated that he felt bad and very sorry for the refugees. And upon hearing that statement, Franz actually wrote a letter saying, I suggest you set up 2 to 3 machine guns and give the people a deadline of 3 hours to disappear in the direction of their homelands. This is exactly where these traditional enemies of Austria did to the Germans in their country. I agree with you that refugees are human beings, but they should flee to Croatia, Bulgaria, Albania, or Turkey, where there are people who look the same, have the same religion, or speak the same language. The next best countries would be Poland, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Ukraine, Russia, Slovenia, and the like. Now, there are virtually no German names left in our police force. The police are enthusiastically bringing the population of their countries of origin to Austria. I'm curious to see whether Germans will be asked to leave our cleared land in favor of the new Slavic migration. I can only attribute the fact that the Germans are enthusiastically serving the cause, instead of fighting back to the fact that most of them haven't even realized what's going on yet. 200 years ago, there were about 90% German names in Austria, but Styria and South Tyrol belong to us. Now there are just 60% Germans left in a shrunken Austria, and they are becoming fewer and fewer. Good night, Austria. And since he had neither a job nor a responsibility really, he would become a self-proclaimed patriot and terrorist. And that's also when he started his gruesome plan, when he started to make leather bombs. And that's also the time where the tragic events of today's case take place. On the 3rd of December 1993, Franz sent his first bomb to a pastor called Augustus, because he was a big volunteer in helping out refugees. The sender's name was addressed as Master Karel Woodhush. As Augustus opened the letter, it exploded and injured him on his hands, face, and neck. But thankfully, he survived. Only 30 minutes after the first bomb went off, there was a woman by the name of Silvana Meixner, who was a TV moderator, and she moderated a show called Home Foreign Home. Silvana, along with her secretary Elizabeth, were in the office going through their mails and noticed a letter where the sender's name was addressed as Mehmet Antic. Just like before, Sylvia opened the letter and the explosion happened. Elizabeth thankfully only just suffered a small injury and was able to get it taken care of immediately. But as for Silvana, she had injuries to her chest, face, one eye, and she needed to be rushed to the hospital immediately. But thankfully, she also survived this attack. On the 4th of December, so just one day later, the head of the Caritas organization, which is an organization that offers all kinds of humanitarian help, Helmut Schiller, also received a suspicious-looking letter, but thankfully, because he was warned by the police not to open any letters, he called the police straight away and the letter could be detained. There was another letter addressed to the press spokesman of Cultural Association, Wolfgang Gombos. Thankfully, though, his colleagues had a wary eye and reported it to the police straight away. The same afternoon, though, the mayor of Vienna, Helmut Zilk, alongside his actress wife Dagmar, arrived at the Vienna airport after a short trip to Zurich. The chauffeur picked up Dagmar, and he also had the mails from the past few days in the back of the car. The mail was brought upstairs to their apartment, and around 8 p.m. Helmut was sitting in his TV watching room and reminded his wife to be more careful and just to not open any random letters. And while his wife Dagmar went to bed, Helmut started to open the letters. The bomb went off just a few minutes later. Helmut started to scream for his wife and was able to drag himself into the bathroom. As soon as Dagmar saw which state her husband was in, she immediately called the ambulance, but unfortunately she only reached the tape. She then called the firefighters, and after she hung up, Dagmar rushed over to her husband and tried bandaging his now half-missing hand. Because Helmut at this point had already lost so much blood, he was brought to the ER where he received emergency surgery. Helmut had several cuts on his face and a 6-inch wide wound on his stomach. Miraculously, though, Helmut managed to survive. The same evening, there were 5 more letter bombs found. There was also letters sent to the club chairwoman of the Green political party, Madeleine Petrovich. This letter was actually sent to the address where Madeleine's brother lived, but Madeleine was still mentioned in this address. Her brother was watching TV where he happened to watch the news regarding the attack on Helmut Silk, and that's when he noticed a suspicious-looking letter on the table addressed to his sister. Again, it had the name Mehmet Antic written on it. So Madeleine's brother called the police and thankfully the bomb was detained. 2 days later, 4 more bombs were found. A member of the Green Party by the name of Theresia Streisand received a letter in the Parliamentary Club, but thankfully the bomb didn't go off. 1.5 hours later, a police officer called Alfred was working in the federal cancellery where he was examining all letters with a metal detector. And that's when he noticed a letter bomb addressed to the Minister of Women's Affairs, Johanna Donald, Working Group for Employment of Foreigners in the Federal Chamber of Commerce. Johanna also received a letter that was successfully detained in time. The police at this point started to notice a pattern. The victims all stood up for refugees and foreigners. The next victim, though, was actually a mistake made by Franz. There was an association of bankruptcy administrators for the Islamic Aid Countries Association, where Franz intended to send the bomb to, but apparently he messed something up and the letter ended up at the Vienna law firm, where a woman called Astrid opened the letter. It exploded right in her hands, leaving Astrid with fractures, cuts, bruises, and on both of her hands and face. She was very badly injured, but she was still alive. At the time, the press was exploding with reports, no pun intended, about those letter bombing incidents. At that time, the press was exploding with reports, no pun intended, about those letter bombs incidents. Suspicions and rumors started to sprout, but the nation realized that whoever was sending those letters didn't appreciate the people standing up for refugees at all. There was always a letter with these bombs, and it said, "We are defending ourselves." Franz was quoting Graf Ernst Rüdiger von Strassenbern. He was a Vienna city commander in 1638 and was responsible for the defense of the city during the Second Turkish invasion. It is believed that Franz saw Ernst Rüdiger as some sort of idol, icon, I don't know. After this wrongly sent bomb, Franz didn't send another bomb for the next 9 months. At the end of August, there was a man in his home smoking outside when he realized that a suspicious-looking man was lounging around a school in Klagenfurt. Since this school was close to the Slovenian border, they taught German as well as Slovenian there. The suspicious person was said to put a 20-inch long pipe-like plastic object with a nail inside the mailbox. The man who saw that happened to actually be a police officer, so he called up his colleagues and they rushed over to the school. Upon arriving, they called the control center, which confirmed the suspicions of a bomb. They transported the pipe to the airport, where the explosive squad checked it at the baggage control. When this person wanted to turn it around for a second control, the bomb went off. One officer was thrown into the window while another suffered acoustic trauma. Unfortunately, the officer operating the machine suffered much worse injuries. Bomb fragments pierced his eye. Both of his hands and part of his lower arms were gone. His colleague quickly regained himself and tied off the stumps. The now half-bladdered officer. Until the ambulance arrived, he had lost almost 1.5 liters of blood. He was immediately brought to the hospital, where he had received 7-hour-long emergency surgery. Unfortunately, the staff weren't able to save his hand, but they did manage to regain his eyesight by transplanting corneas from a donor. After months of being in the hospital, the officer actually got prosthetics arms and was even able to continue his work as a police officer, but only in their service. In 2000, he actually had donor hands transplanted, and as far as I could find out, the operation and the healing went very, very well. 2 months later, 2 more bombs were found. One at the Vienna Publishing House in Klagenfurt and one at the Counseling Center for Foreigners in Dornbirn. 1 day later, another bomb was found at a paper factory in Hallein. The next day, another bomb was delivered to the Tyrolean monastery in Wilhelm. Thankfully, though, none of those bombs actually detonated. On the night from the 4th February to the 5th in 1995, in the Roma settlement in Hanga Oberwart in Burgenland, there were several families living in bungalows. That night, 4 men, the youngest just being 18 years old, decided to go for a walk. The names of the 4 men were Joseph, Karl, Erwin and Peter. 200 meters from the settlement, they came to a traffic sign with a plate stuck on it, Roma back to India. The 4 men wanted to remove it, and that's when the bomb went off. All 4 men died instantly. 1 man had lost his hand, 2 men had actually lost half their skull cap, and 1 man's chest was just tore open. A memorial service was held where many politicians were present. A day later, there was an explosion in Stinaz at a garbage dump. Eric, who was an employee of the environmental service, accidentally touched a spray can camouflage pipe, and that's when the bomb went off in his hands. Eric had to have 5 operations and lost parts of his hand and fingers. 4 months later, a woman called Sabine, who was the secretary of the TV editor Arabella Kisbauer, was busy sorting some letters when she noticed a letter decorated with roses and flowers with the sender's address, fans of Arabella. When she opened it, the letter exploded. The bomb fragments hit her in her face and she suffered cuts on her cheek. On the same day in Linz, in an intercontact partner office, Eve was opening her mail when the bomb went off. The bomb fragments tore her hand open so badly that she could only use them to a limited extent. A few days later in Lübeck in northern Germany, SPD political party managing director Thomas Rotter received an envelope which donated in his hand right away. 4 months later, on the 15th of October, a local doctor called Mahmoud received a letter. It also exploded in his hand, leaving him with injuries to hand and fingers. His wife immediately gave him first aid and an ambulance was called. A few minutes later, in the same city, Poisdorf, it shred the hand of refugee helper Maria while she was opening a letter addressed to her. The next target was a family with South Korean roots, but thankfully the bomb was found and detained in time. 2 more bombs were delivered to the UNO Refugee Commission and a family of Indian origin in Vienna. Fortunately, both exploded in the letterbox, so nobody was injured. Another bomb was addressed to Angela Resitarens. Angela was the mother of 3 artists and actors in Austria, but they had Serbian names. But thankfully, again, it could be discovered in time and explosion could be prevented. There were also many investigated mishaps. A special commission was only formed 3 years after the first attack. And the reason it took so long was the lack of experience in combating terrorist cells. Bomb disposal squad was also very thinly staffed. There was also an information leak which is still unexplained till today. In the beginning, police falsely suspected a lot of people knowing of being in right-wing extremism organization, as it was assumed that it was a whole group and not a single individual responsible for it. At the end of February in 1995, work began on a predatory profile. The X-Files program aired a whole episode on the leather bomber and asked viewers to come forward with any information and anything that they might knew. The reward was actually set at 10 million shillings, which was Austria's currency at the time, which would be roughly around $1 million now. A book was even written which literally translated to "A bomb layer is living among us," describing how Franz Fuchs probably lives, acts, and works. It was another attempt to find something out about him. From October 1996, Franz started to carry a hand grenade everywhere with him, just in case that the police did find out who he was and tried to arrest him. He planned on committing suicide. Franz became very paranoid. He started writing down license plate numbers of cars that would just drive by. Franz also disconnected his phone and told his parents and brother that they were only allowed to visit his house with a special knock. Franz actually even thought that the new neighbors that had just moved in across the streets were actually agents of the FBI. During a traffic spot, Franz was pulled over by two police officers. He thought that the police officers knew who he was. He got out of his car with a bomb in his hand. When a police officer approached him, Franz just shouted, "Here you go." He turned the bomb towards him. The initial plan was that it would tear him apart and also shoot through the police officers as it went off. But the bomb slipped out of his hand and fell to the ground, and as Franz reached down to grab the bomb went off and Franz lost both of his arms in the process. He was so shocked and in panic in the moment that he just started to run back to his house. The police officers ran after him and fired 6 warning shots. Franz's plan was actually to run until he died of blood loss. This was his goal after all. He wanted to kill himself. In the end, he was caught and transported to the hospital where he underwent emergency surgery. While Franz was in hospital recovering, the police searched his house and found more than enough evidence. In court, Franz refused to make any statements. He just shouted in the courtroom until he was let out. He was diagnosed and found out to have severe personality disorder. He was found guilty and sentenced to prison in March of 1999. And on the 26th of February in 2000, Franz Fuchs took his own life by hanging himself with the cord of his electrical razor. And that's it for today's case. I hope you all liked the video, and I also hope that you're very excited for the February. I do have some cases that are very well known, and I also have some cases that I personally have never heard of. So definitely stay tuned for that. Please don't forget to subscribe, leave me a like and a comment on which case you'd like to see me cover next. I hope I see you all in my next video. Bye!